The first time I saw him, he was a silhouette against the neon glow of Manhattan, his broad shoulders cutting through the chaos of the city like a blade through silk. I was late, as usual, weaving through the crowded sidewalks, my messenger bag slapping against my hip as I cursed under my breath. Then he turned, and those gray eyes locked onto mine, and I swear the world stopped just for a second, just long enough to make me forget why I was running. My name is Ethan Cole, a 25-year-old graphic designer scraping by in New York City, where dreams are as expensive as rent. I worked at a mid-tier ad agency, the kind that promised creative freedom, but mostly delivered tight deadlines and coffee-fueled all-nighters. That night, I was headed to a team happy hour at the Rusty Anchor, a trendy bar in Chelsea where my coworker, Sarah, was celebrating her engagement. She'd been gushing about her fiancé, Liam. For a week show, he was charming, successful, and so totally out of my league. Ethan, you'll see. I wasn't one for office gossip, but Sarah's excitement was infectious, and I was curious to meet the guy who'd swept her off her feet. The bar was packed when I arrived, the air thick with laughter and the clink of glasses. Sarah waved me over to a corner booth, her blonde curls bouncing as she introduced me to the group. And there he was, Liam. Or so I thought. He stood out like a storm cloud in a clear sky, tall, lean, with a jawline that could cut glass and those piercing gray eyes that seemed to see right through me. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and his tailored blazer hugged his frame in a way that screamed money and confidence. I extended my hand, forcing a smile. Ethan. Nice to meet Sarah's mystery man. He shook my hand, his grip firm but warm, and a slow, almost amused smile curled his lips. I'm not Sarah's anything, he said, his voice low and smooth, like whiskey over ice. I'm Julian Kane. Just a friend. I froze, my hand still in his, my brain scrambling to catch up. Sarah laughed, nudging Julian's arm. Oh, stop it. You're freaking him out. Ethan, Liam's running late. Julian's just keeping me company till he gets here. She winked, but I barely registered it. Julian's gaze hadn't left mine, and there was something in its emething that made my pulse race and my throat go dry. I mumbled an apology and slid into the booth, trying to ignore the heat creeping up my neck. The night wore on, and Liam finally showed up, a perfectly nice guy with a boyish grin and a knack for telling dad jokes. He was everything Sarah had described, but my eyes kept drifting to Julian, who sat quietly at the end of the booth, nursing a drink and watching the group with a detached intensity. Every now and then, our gazes would meet, and it was like a spark in the dark, sharp, electric, and impossible to ignore. I told myself it was nothing. I wasn't out at work, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't see the point. I'd always kept my personal life private, especially after a bad breakup last year that left me wary of anything resembling romance. But Julian was different. He wasn't loud or flashy like the guys I usually met in the city's gay bars. He was commanding, like he owned every room he walked into without even trying. When he leaned over to ask me about my job, his voice was quiet but deliberate, and I found myself rambling about typography and color theory just to keep him talking. He really listened, and by the time I realized I'd been monopolizing his attention, Sarah was shooting me a knowing grin. Careful, Ethan, she teased later, as we grabbed drinks at the bar. Julian's not the settling down type. He's like this mysterious alpha vibe. You know, always in control, always one step ahead. I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me. Alpha. It fit him too well. The night ended with a group photo. Julian's arm brushing against mine as we squeezed into the frame. I could feel the warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and it took everything in me not to lean closer. As we said our goodbyes, he slipped a business card into my hand, his fingers lingering just a moment too long. "In case you ever want to talk design," he said, that same half-smile playing on his lips. I nodded. My voice caught somewhere in my throat, and watched him disappear into the city's pulse. Back in my tiny Brooklyn apartment, I stared at the card, Julian Kane. Consultant. Kane Enterprises. No job title. No details. Just a name and a number. I tossed it onto my nightstand, telling myself I'd never call. But as I lay in bed, the memory of his eyes burned into me, and I knew I was already in too deep. The next morning, I was back at the agency, bleary-eyed and nursing a coffee. Sarah cornered me in the break room, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "So, what did you think of Julian?" she asked, stirring her latte with a smirk. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "He seems intense." She laughed, leaning closer. "Oh, he is. And he asked about you after you left. Wanted to know if you were single." My heart did a traitorously hopeful flip, but I forced a neutral expression. Probably just being polite. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Julian doesn't do polite. He does interested." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Lunch today. J. K." My stomach lurched. It was him. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button, torn between excitement and the nagging voice in my head warning me to stay away. I didn't know it then, but that text was the first step into a storm I couldn't escape, a storm of desire, secrets, and a connection that would unravel everything I thought I knew about myself. Julian Kane wasn't just a man. He was the alpha who'd claim me, body and soul, and I was about to learn what that really meant. I said yes to lunch. Of course. How could I not? Julian's text had sat on my phone like a live wire, daring me to touch it. By noon, I was standing outside a sleek bistro in Soho, my palms sweaty despite the autumn chill. The place was all glass and steel, the kind of spot that screamed money, and I felt wildly out of place in my thrift store jacket and scuffed sneakers. Then I saw him, Julian, leaning against the entrance, his dark coat open to reveal a crisp white shirt, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. "Ethan," he said, my name sounding like a promise in his mouth. "You came." There was that smile again, subtle but devastating, and I managed a nod, hoping I didn't look as nervous as I felt. Inside, the hostess led us to a corner table with a view of the street, and I tried not to gawk at the prices on the menu. Julian ordered for both of us some kind of grilled salmon dish I'd never pronounce and leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a puzzle he was determined to solve. "So," he began, his voice low enough that I had to lean in to hear him. "Why graphic design?" It was a simple question, but the way he asked it made me feel like he actually cared. I told him about growing up in a small town in Ohio, where art was my escape from a family that didn't get me, and how I'd clawed my way to New York with nothing but a portfolio and a stubborn streak. He listened, his gaze never wavering, and when I finished, he leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "You're braver than you think, Ethan." I laughed, embarrassed, and changed the subject. "What about you? What does a consultant do?" "Exactly." His smile tightened, just for a moment, before he shrugged. "I solve problems. Mostly for businesses. Sometimes for people. It was vague, but I didn't push. There was something about Julian that made you want to trust him, even when you knew you shouldn't. Lunch stretched into 2 hours. The conversation flowing like we'd known each other for years. He had a way of drawing me out, making me talk about things I usually kept buried me, fears of failing in the city, my dreams of starting my own studio someday. Every now and then, his hand would brush mine on the table, and it was like a jolt of electricity, sharp and addictive. By the time we parted ways, I was dizzy with something I couldn't name. And when he said, "I'll see you again," it wasn't a question. The next week was a blur of late nights at the agency and stolen moments with Julian. He'd show up unannounced outside my office, at my favorite coffee shop, once even at the subway station, and every time, my heart would leap like a traitor. We'd talk for hours, about everything and nothing, and I started to notice the way he moved through the world, confident, almost predatory, like he was always one step ahead of everyone else. Sarah noticed, too. "You're glowing," she teased one morning, tossing a paperclip at me. "Julian's got you hooked, doesn't he?" I denied it, but she wasn't wrong. Julian was under my skin, and I didn't know how to stop either if I even wanted to. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, and the agency was throwing a client party at a rooftop bar in Midtown. Julian was there, of course, invited as Sarah's +1 since Liam was out of town. The city sparkled below us, a sea of lights under a bruised purple sky, and Julian found me by the railing, a drink in his hand and that look in his eyes. "You're avoiding me," he said, his tone teasing but his gaze serious. I shook my head, my mouth dry. "I'm not. I just don't know what this is." I gestured between us, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something woodsy and warm, and tilted his head. "What do you want it to be, Ethan?" I didn't have an answer, not one I could say out loud. My whole life, I played it safe, kept my feelings locked down. But Julian was unraveling me, piece by piece. Before I could respond, he reached out, his fingers grazing my jaw, and my breath caught. "You feel it too," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Don't pretend you don't." The air between us crackled, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me right there, in front of everyone. But then Sarah's voice cut through the haze, calling us over for a toast, and the moment shattered. I pulled back, my heart pounding, and followed him to the group, trying to act normal while my world tilted on its axis. Later that night, as I walked home alone, my phone buzzed with another text from Julian. "Meet me tomorrow, 8 p.m. My place." He included an address in the West Village, and my stomach flipped. This was a point of no return. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew I couldn't walk away. Julian's apartment was nothing like I'd expected. Tucked away in a quiet corner of the West Village, it was a loft with exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a view of the Hudson that made my tiny studio look like a closet. The space was minimalist but warm, with leather furniture and abstract art that probably cost more than my yearly salary. When I arrived, Julian was in the kitchen, pouring wine, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were distractingly well-defined. "You look nervous," he said, handing me a glass. I took it, my fingers brushing his, and muttered something about traffic. He smirked, leading me to the couch, where we sat closer than necessary. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. "Why am I here, Julian?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He leaned back, studying me. Because I want you here. Isn't that enough? It wasn't. But it was. We talked. Like we always did. But there was an edge to it now. A tension that hadn't been there before. He told me about growing up in Boston, the only child of a wealthy family, and how he'd left it all behind to carve his own path. I don't like being told who to be, he said, his eyes locked on mine. Or who to want. My breath hitched, and I set my glass down, afraid I'd spill it. Then he moved closer, his knee brushing mine, and asked, "What are you afraid of, Ethan?" It was a question I'd been dodging my whole life. I thought of my parents, who'd never accepted me, my ex, who'd left me because I wasn't enough, and the part of me that still believed I didn't deserve someone like Julian. Everything, I admitted, my voice raw. He didn't laugh or look away. Instead, he reached out, his hand cupping the back of my neck, and pulled me into a kiss that felt like a claim. It was fierce, hungry, and I melted into it, my hands gripping his shirt as if he might vanish. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath ragged. "You're mine," he whispered, and the words sent a shiver through me. I didn't know what he meant, not really, but I felt it, deep in my bones, like a truth I'd always known. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Julian and I were inseparable, stealing moments between my work and his mysterious consulting gigs. He'd show up at my apartment with takeout, or I'd find myself at his loft, tangled in his sheets, his hands mapping every inch of me. But there were shadows. Two things he didn't say, calls he took in private, and the way he'd sometimes look at me, like he was waiting for something to break. Sarah started to notice. "You're different," she said one day, cornering me at the office. "Happier. But careful. Okay. Julian's intense. And not in a bad way. But he's got layers you don't know about." I brushed it off. But her words lingered. Then came the night I saw one of those layers for myself. We were at a gallery opening in Chelsea, one of Julian's work events. The crowd was all sharp suits and champagne flutes, and I felt like an imposter in my borrowed blazer. Julian was in his element, charming everyone. But there was a hardness in his eyes when a man approached USA tall, older guy with a shark smile. "Julian," the man said, his tone clipped. "We need to talk. Now." Julian's jaw tightened, but he nodded, excusing himself. I watched them disappear into a corner, their voices low but heated, and caught fragments of words like deal and consequences. When Julian returned, he was distant, his usual warmth replaced by a guarded edge. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He shrugged, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Just business." But I wasn't stupid. There was something he wasn't telling me, something big, and it gnawed at me all the way home. That night, lying in his bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was falling for someone I didn't fully know. "Tell me something real," I said, my voice soft in the dark. He turned to me, his hand tracing my cheek. "You're the realest thing in my life, Ethan." That's enough for now. It wasn't, but I let it be, because the alternative, losing him, was too much to bear. The cracks started to show in late October, when the city was draped in orange leaves and the air smelled of rain. Julian and I were still caught in our own world, but the secrets he kept were like shadows creeping closer. I'd catch him staring at his phone, his face unreadable, or he'd disappear for hours with vague excuses about meetings. I wanted to trust him, but doubt is a relentless thing. and it was starting to whisper louder than my heart. One night, after a quiet dinner at his loft, I found a folder on his desk thick, official-looking, with Kane Enterprises stamped on it. Curiosity got the better of me, and while he was in the shower, I flipped it open. Inside were contracts, emails, and what looked like surveillance reports, all tied to a company I'd never heard of. One name kept popping up, Victor Grayson, the man from the gallery. My stomach twisted as I skimmed a page mentioning acquisitions and leverage, words that felt sharp and dangerous. When Julian emerged, towel around his waist, he froze when he saw the folder in my hands. "What are you doing?" His voice was low, not angry, but something worse, disappointed. I stammered, holding up the papers. "What is this?" "Julian." "Who's Victor Grayson?" He crossed the room in 2 strides, taking the folder from me, his jaw tight. "You shouldn't have seen that." "Then tell me." I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "You keep me in the dark, and I'm supposed to jest. What? Trust you blindly?" He looked at me, his eyes stormy, and for a moment, I thought he'd shut me out. But then he sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "It's complicated, Ethan. My work, it's not just consulting. I fix things people don't want fixed. Grayson's one of them." I stared at him, trying to piece it together. "Are you, what, some kind of corporate hitman?" It was half a joke, but his silence wasn't reassuring. He stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "I'm not a good guy, Ethan, but I'm trying to be. For you." My heart ached at that, torn between fear and the pull I still felt toward him. I wanted to push, to demand more, but his hand found mine, and I let the moment slip away. The next day, Sarah dropped a bomb. We were grabbing coffee near the office when she leaned in, her voice low. "I heard something about Julian. From Liam. He says Julian's tied up with some shady people, big money. Big problems. You need to be careful, Ethan." I laughed it off, but her words sank into me like stones. That night, I confronted Julian, my voice shaking. "Are you in trouble? Is that why you're so secretive?" He didn't deny it. Instead, he pulled me close, his hands framing my face. "I'm handling it," he said, his voice fierce. "But you need to trust me, Ethan. Can you do that?" I wanted to say yes, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I kissed him, hard and desperate, as if I could anchor us both to something solid. The breaking point came a week later. We were at a club in the East Village, the music pounding, lights flashing. Julian was tense, his eyes scanning the crowd like he was waiting for something. Then I saw him, Victor Grayson, weaving through the dancers, his gaze locked on us. Julian grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the exit. "We need to go? Now." Outside, the air was cold, and Julian's face was a mask of controlled fury. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice rising. He didn't answer, just kept walking, his grip on my arm tight. We turned into an alley, and that's when I saw the car, a black SUV, idling, with 2 men inside. My heart stopped. "Julian, what the hell? Get in," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. I hesitated, but the look in his eyes, fear, not for himself, but for me, made me move. Inside the car, he finally spoke. "Grayson's not just a client. He's dangerous, and he knows about you." My blood ran cold. "Knows about me? Why?" Julian's jaw clenched. Because he knows you're my weakness. The words hit me like a punch. And I realized then how deep this went, not just for me, but for him. Whatever he was involved in. It wasn't just business. It was personal. And I was caught in the middle. The SUV sped through the city, the lights blurring past like a fever dream. Julian sat beside me, his hand on my knee, a silent anchor in the chaos. The driver and the man in the passenger seat didn't speak, their faces hard and unreadable. I wanted to ask a million questions, but the weight of Julian's words, my weakness, kept me silent. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments of his life I'd glimpsed, the folder, the hushed arguments, the way he always seemed to be watching his back. We stopped at a nondescript warehouse in Brooklyn, the kind of place that looked abandoned but probably wasn't. Julian led me inside, his hand firm on my elbow. The interior was stark concrete floors, flickering fluorescent lights, and a table covered in laptops and papers. A woman with short, platinum hair and a scar across her cheek was waiting, her eyes narrowing as we approached. "This him?" she asked. Her voice clipped. Julian nodded. "Ethan, this is Mara. She's a colleague." Mara didn't smile. "You're a liability, kid," she said, looking me over. "But Julian says you're worth it." I bristled, but Julian's hand tightened on my arm, a silent plea to stay calm. He turned to Mara. "What's the situation?" She gestured to the laptops, where security feeds showed grainy footage of men in suits outside a building I recognized me apartment. My stomach dropped. "Grayson's people," Mara said. "They've been tailing you both." I turned to Julian, my voice shaking. "Why? What do they want?" He hesitated, then pulled me aside, his voice low. "Grayson runs a network extortion. Blackmail. The kind of stuff that stays off the books." I was supposed to help him close a deal, but I backed out. He didn't take it well. I stared at him, the pieces clicking into place. "And me? What do I have to do with this?" Julian's eyes softened, but his voice was steel. "He knows I care about you. He's using you to get to me." The words were a knife, cutting through the haze of my feelings. I wanted to be angry, to scream at him for dragging me into this. But all I could feel was funnet for myself. But for him. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. For the next few hours, I sat in the corner, watching Julian and Mara strategize. They spoke in code, mentioning names and places I didn't understand. But one thing was clear: Grayson wasn't just a businessman. He was a predator, and Julian had crossed him in a way that put us both in danger. By dawn, they had a plan, something about leaking information to the feds to take Grayson down, but it required Julian to meet him. Alone. "No," I said, standing up, my voice louder than I intended. "You're not going alone." Julian looked at me, surprised, then crossed the room in 2 strides. "Ethan, this isn't your fight." I shook my head, my hands trembling. "It is now? You made it mine when you kissed me." His expression softened, and for a moment, it was just us, the world falling away. Then Mara cleared her throat. "We don't have time for this." The plan moved fast. Julian would meet Grayson at a neutral location, a diner in Queens, while Mara's team monitored from a distance. I insisted on coming, despite Julian's protests, and he finally relented, his eyes dark with worry. At the diner, I sat in a booth, my heart pounding, while Julian met Grayson at a table across the room. I couldn't hear their conversation, But I saw the tension in Julian's shoulders, the cold smile on Grayson's face. Then Grayson leaned forward, sliding a photo across the table. It was me, leaving my apartment. My blood ran cold. Julian's face didn't change, but his hand clenched into a fist. Whatever he said next made Grayson's smile falter, and he stood, leaving the diner without another word. Julian returned to me, his expression unreadable. "It's done," he said, but his voice was tight. "He's backing off her now." That night, back at his loft, Julian told me the truth. He wasn't just a consultant. He was a fixer, someone who cleaned up messes for the rich and powerful. And Grayson had been his biggest client until Julian refused to help him blackmail a senator. "I couldn't do it," he said, his voice raw. "Not after I met you." I didn't know what to say, so I kissed him, pouring everything I felt into it: fear, love, and the desperate hope that we'd come out of this alive. The next few days were a blur of paranoia. I started noticing cars lingering too long outside my apartment, strangers watching me a little too closely. Julian insisted I stay with him, and I didn't argue. His loft became our fortress, but even there, the tension was suffocating. We'd lie in bed, his arms around me, but I could feel the weight of his secrets pressing down on us. Mara called one morning with bad news. Grayson hadn't backed off. He'd doubled down, sending threats through back channels that even Mara's team couldn't trace. "He's playing dirty," she said over speakerphone, her voice grim. "And he's got eyes on Ethan." Julian's face hardened, and he ended the call abruptly. "You're not leaving my side," he told me, his tone leaving no room for debate. I nodded, but inside, I was unraveling. I'd never felt so powerless, so caught in someone else's war. That night, Julian took me to a safe small apartment in Jersey City, bare except for a mattress and a few chairs. Mara was there, along with two other guys who looked like they'd seen their share of fights. They laid out the new plan: leak Grayson's financial records to the press. Not just the feds. It was risky. Grayson had connections everywhere, but it was the only way to cripple him. Julian would handle the drop, while Mara's team kept watch. I hated it. The idea of Julian walking into danger again made my chest ache. But he wouldn't listen. "This is what I do," he said, his voice fierce. "I protect what's mine." I wanted to argue, to tell him I wasn't some possession. But the look in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't about ownership. It was about love, raw and unyielding. And it scared me as much as it thrilled me. The drop was set for midnight at a pier in Red Hook. I wasn't supposed to go, but I snuck into the back of Mara's van, hiding under a blanket like some kid playing spy. Julian didn't notice until we were halfway there. And when he did, his anger was a quiet, dangerous thing. "You could get hurt," he hissed, pulling me close. "I can't lose you." I met his gaze, my own resolve hardening. "You won't." The pier was dark, the air heavy with salt and oil. Julian carried a USB drive with the files, his steps steady but his eyes scanning every shadow. I stayed in the van with Mara, watching through a grainy feed as he approached a man in a hooded jacket. The exchange was too quick, and then everything went wrong. A second car screeched into the lot, headlights blinding, and men poured out, their guns glinting in the dark. Mara cursed, grabbing her radio, but I was already moving, my heart in my throat. I didn't think, just ran toward Julian, who was grappling with one of the men. A gunshot cracked through the air, and I froze, my blood turning to ice. Julian spun, his eyes finding mine. And in that moment, I saw everything: fear, fury, and a love so fierce it burned. He shouted my name, tackling me to the ground as another shot rang out. When the chaos cleared, Mara's team had subdued the attackers, and Julian was holding me, his hands shaking as he checked me for injuries. "You idiot," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you stay in the van?" I couldn't answer, just clung to him, my face buried in his chest, the sound of his heartbeat grounding me. The files went public the next day, splashed across every major news outlet. Grayson's empire started to crumble, his name tied to scandals that would keep him running for years. But the victory felt hollow. Julian was distant, his guilt over putting me in danger eating at him. "I should have kept you out of this," he said one night, staring out at the city from his loft. I took his hand, forcing him to look at me. "I chose you, Julian. All of you. Don't push me away now." He kissed me then, slow and desperate, and for the first time, I felt like we might actually make it. Grayson's downfall was everywhere: headlines, TV screens, even the office break room, where Sarah showed me articles on her phone, her eyes wide. "Did you know about this?" she asked, and I shook my head, not trusting myself to lie convincingly. Julian had asked me to keep quiet, and I did, but the weight of it all was crushing me. I wasn't built for this world of secrets and danger, but I was in it now, and there was no going back. Julian was different after the pier. He was still the man I loved: fierce, protective, with that smile that could unravel me, but there was a new edge to him, a wariness that hadn't been there before. He'd check his phone constantly, his conversations with Mara clipped and urgent. I tried to give him space, but it hurt, watching him pull away even as he held me tighter at night. One evening, he took me to Central Park, the air crisp and the paths quiet. We sat on a bench near the Bethesda fountain, the water glinting under the streetlights. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low. My heart sank, bracing for the worst. "I'm leaving New York. Just for a while. There's cleanup to do. After Grayson." I stared at him, the words not sinking in. "Cleanup? What does that even mean?" He looked away, his jaw tight. "There are people who still want me gone. I need to tie up loose ends. Make sure they don't come after you." I grabbed his arm, my voice rising. "Then take me with you." He shook his head, his eyes pained. "I can't, Ethan. Not this time. It's too dangerous." I felt like I was breaking, the pieces of me scattering across the park. "So what? I just wait here. Pretend this doesn't kill me." He pulled me close, his lips brushing my forehead. "You're the only thing keeping me sane," he whispered. "I'll come back. I promise." But promises are fragile, and I'd heard too many broken ones before. He left the next day. No goodbye, just a note on my pillow: "I'll find you. Trust me." I wanted to believe him, but the days stretched into weeks, and the silence was deafening. I threw myself into work, designing campaigns with a fervor that worried Sarah. "You're not okay," she said one night, dragging me to a bar. "Talk to me." I didn't. I couldn't. How do you explain loving someone who's half a ghost? Then, one night, I got a call from an unknown number. My heart leapt, hoping it was Julian. But it was Mara. "He's in trouble," she said, her voice tight. "Grayson's people, they found him. I'm sending you an address. Get here fast." I didn't think. Just grabbed my jacket and ran. The city a blur as I hailed a cab to an address in Philly. The place was a dive bar, dim and smoky, with Mara waiting outside. She didn't waste time. He's inside. But it's bad. They've got him cornered. My stomach twisted as I followed her in, the air thick with tension. Julian was in a back room, surrounded by 3 men, his face bruised but his eyes blazing. When he saw me, something flickered in his expression. Hope. Maybe. Or fear. I didn't think. I grabbed a bottle from a table and smashed it over the nearest guy's head. My hands shaking, but my aim true. Mara took down another, and Julian handled the third, his movements swift and brutal. When it was over, he pulled me into his arms, his breath ragged. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but he didn't let go. We left the bar, Mara covering our tracks. In the car, Julian told me everything, how Grayson's network was deeper than they'd thought, how he'd been trying to dismantle it from the inside. "I didn't want you involved," he said, his voice breaking. "But you're the only thing that makes this worth it." I kissed him, tasting blood and desperation, and knew I'd follow him anywhere, no matter the cost. We couldn't stay in Philly. Mara arranged a safe house in upstate New York, a cabin tucked in the Adirondacks, far from the city's chaos. It was just us, surrounded by pines and silence. And for the first time, I felt like we could breathe. Julian's bruises faded, but the weight of what we'd been through lingered. We spent days by the fire, talking about everything, our fears, our dreams, the life we wanted when this was over. One night, under a sky full of stars, Julian took my hand and led me to the porch. "I never planned for you," he said, his voice soft. "You were supposed to be a distraction, someone I'd forget. But you're everything, Ethan." My throat tightened, and I pulled him close, kissing him like it was the first time. "You're my alpha," I whispered, half joking. But his eyes darkened, and he kissed me harder, claiming me in a way that felt final. Mara's team kept working, dismantling Grayson's network piece by piece. By winter, it was over. Grayson was behind bars, his empire in ruins. Julian was free, or as free as someone like him could be. We moved back to New York, to a new apartment in Brooklyn, smaller than his loft, but ours. I quit the agency, started freelancing, and Julian took on smaller jobs, ones that didn't carry the weight of blood and secrets. But the real change was us. We'd been through fire, and it forged something unbreakable. Julian wasn't perfect, he was still too stubborn, too guarded, but he was mine, and I was his. One evening, as snow fell outside, he pulled me onto the couch, his arms around me. "I thought I'd lose you," he said, his voice raw. I smiled, resting my head against his chest. "You're stuck with me now." The world wasn't kind to people like us, not always. But we'd found each other, 2 lost souls in a city of millions. And that was enough. Julian wasn't Sarah's fiancé, or anyone else's. He was my alpha, my home. And together, we'd write our own story, one of love, redemption, and the courage to claim what mattered most.